Hey there, and welcome to another episode of the AI Forecast, a weekly podcast hosted by me, Paul Muller, and proudly sponsored by the amazing team at Cloudera. As always, we're joined by the industry's leading practitioners to explore the past, the present, and the future of enterprise data and AI. And the emphasis today is very much on practice, on putting ideas into practice. I mean, have you ever thought to yourself, if only I knew then what I know now? Well, today's guest had just that thought and went on to condense his experiences down into what has become the best-selling book, Data and Analytics Strategy for Business, to help others accelerate their own journeys. And it's been described by some readers as an actionable guide for getting more from your data. After decades of experience as a CDO for leading firms around the world, the author later founded the AI and data analytics advisory firm DataTick, where he serves as CEO. Welcome to the podcast, Simon Asplen-Taylor.
Thank you, Paul.
It's great to have you on. Now, we start every episode with the lightning round. I can see you quivering in fear here at the moment. Are you ready to play along?
I am, yep, ready.
Let's do it. All right. Well, the first question is, I ask everybody I meet, what would people who know you best say is your superpower?
My superpower is really knowing how to use data analytics and AI in any given situation, and whether that be work or at home. I am always talking about, an example of yes, we could do this, we could do that with it, start getting straight into it, and yeah, just a super data geek, really.
A useful superpower for CDO. Next question. What would you say the most impactful technology of all time was?
So this may be controversial, but for me, it was a spreadsheet. And I guess, which is kind of ironic because I have spent most of my life trying to get rid of them, but actually I use them for everything. I use them for, for me personally, I probably use them for, what do I need to take on holiday? What do I need to analyzing things? And I think what it's done, I first used a spreadsheet back in 1983 when Lotus 123 was introduced on the first IBM PC for the chief exec of IBM, Tony Cleaver, who was a classics scholar. And all he did on my first report was to say, you split your infinitives and threw it back to me. But the reality is what he wanted was to have some of the data from his customers on his desk for when they walked in. So we set this up, Lotus 123, twin floppy. That was my first exposure to spreadsheets, and then Microsoft Excel, and I still use them every day now. So it does have a big impact. It has had a big impact. It makes people more hands-on with data, but I have to say it's also created some problems as well.
You talk about that in the book where you had two executives that both thought they had the right data. Arguing with the CEO. So I personally witnessed that. In fact, I might have been one of those executives. Moving on. Speaking of technologies, we talk about AI, obviously, on this podcast a lot, and we talk about the sorts of things it can automate for businesses. But what would you personally like to see AI automate in your future?
I think government. So for me, I think I would like to see, more expertise, and I think AI can do that. I think there's a lot that AI could do to automate some major elements of government, better decision making, better analysis of joined up policies, all kinds of things. I think, it would be really powerful. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to replace everything. I think augmentation, but actually AI-driven government would be quite exciting.
Yeah, I'm interested in that idea. Last but not least, I've realized that my relationship with data has been informed and improved by some hacks, some I don't know if you'd call them best practices that have helped me get more out of data in my business life. What hack or best practice has helped you most when working with data? I
think the first one is having done lots of different things, I think focusing on the business outcomes. And I always say that, the first thing you should say is, what am I trying to do here? What value can I create with it? And once you know what that is, and it could be a business thing, it could be a personal thing. Once you know, it informs what data you need, what do you need to do with it, and how do you do that? So I think often people start by doing some things. I think, the value is the first piece. I think the second one is making sure it makes sense. Have you got the right quality of data? Does the data you're using make sense? Because it makes you question things. And I think the third one is kind of using it to tell a story. I always think that, people look at data. You see people, I remember the days of people having loads of data on a report and people stare at it and go, we got all this information. Well, it's not really information. It's still data. Telling it into a story of, well, you've got these customers, you've changed your prices, you've made their contracts more complicated. Therefore, they may be about to leave. What are you going to do about it? That becomes a story, becomes quite powerful. So that's where I would start is really thinking about the value and then what are you trying to do and turn it into story and then improving on it.
Yeah, well, let's talk about, I guess, the evolving nature of business's relationship with data. We'll talk a bit about your background maybe because you were, if I understand correctly, the first CDO, the first chief data officer in the UK during the early sort of 2000s time.
Yep.
How have you seen the role evolve since then?
I think in those days, data wasn't a professional, right? If you went to any organization, people were talking about systems. People were talking about content, platforms like Netflix, were all about content. So people talked about content. It was becoming more powerful, but data was less of a thing. It was all about systems. The CIOs were in charge of all technology and data. And what happened was that, during a period of time, data became a profession. And I think it grew up and needed to. So I think, for me, I saw more and more roles emerge around governance and quality and engineering, debate about where those roles live, but definitely that maturity. And I think now I just see everyone has data, analytics, insights, AI in their job title. And I think that's good. I don't think we're quite there yet, but there's a lot of change in that respect.
Yeah, I want to get onto that in a minute. I want to, talk a bit about your background, but one thing in particular that you are doing is, if I understand correctly, you're going to need to explain this. I read in your bio that you advise the data and AI strategy for a non-profit for, if I understand correctly, an elephant sanctuary, which, if I understand, there's a bit of a passion project for you. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think there's several things. I grew up as a child in India. I have a bit of a thing about elephants. Always have done. There's an elephant in every room in my house. There's an elephant in every room in our office. I'm in the elephant room, so we have elephant pictures up on the wall and everything else. And it's just a bit of a thing. Has been for a long time. And I was approached by an organisation, a trust called Pangaea, and they are trying to rehouse elephant from circuses and zoos into Europe's first conservation area for elephants in Portugal. So they're buying the land, moving elephant to there, and so the role is really, it's about elephant, which is kind of exciting, but you can do lots of things with this. So this is where the gloves are off, rather than being driven by a corporation who are saying, you will do this, these are the rules. Actually, elephants are not people, so we can track them. We can check on their health. We can see where they are. So really what we're doing is planning all of that now before the elephant are moved into the park, planning how we'll do data analytics properly, with gloves off, doing everything we possibly can. Okay. And when you do it that way, you realize that, almost there's a bit of frustration when you're advising a client in what you do, but when you're able to dive into it and take control, you can actually do far more. So I'm very, very excited about what we're about to do with that.
I love the idea of the fact that the pro bono work means that you can, to your, as you say, take the gloves off. It's a no hold barred opportunity for you to explore and innovate, which is a bit of a theme in the book, especially towards the latter chapters. You talk a bit about that. So let's talk about the book. What was your inspiration for writing it, especially now as you formed a consulting business? I mean, the obvious question is, why are you giving away all the good stuff?
I think several things. You touched on it earlier, Paul. It was that little thing about, as I've got older and a kind of few more grey hairs, I really want to share stuff. And I guess that comes with a little bit of wanting to give back, the charity stuff and things like that. So wanting to give back, and I think it's also validation. I've kind of seen people who say, oh, they know about something, and I wasn't sure how much I knew. And I think when you start writing about it, you have to prove that. And I found there were things that I didn't know as well as I should do. There were weaknesses in that. And it's not until you can really write it down and articulate it that you realize, do you know it? And that was validation. And I needed a bit of that personal validation, which is fine. We all need it in some form or another. That was my validation. And I felt a bit more confident. And that, I suppose, then helped with the business, because actually, we're competing against big, consulting firms with big budgets, big marketing, and have been around for a long time. And so you have to do a little bit more. And that was a little bit of putting ourselves out there, sharing that information. And if people get some of that for free and it improves the data community, happy days too.
Well, look, I'm just humbled to think that somebody like yourself, and having read most of the book now, it's very clear that you are I won't say a polymath might not be the right phrase, but you clearly have read widely, both across technology and business. And to think somebody like yourself might feel imposter syndrome gives me hope that it's when I'm not alone.
Yeah, thanks, Paul.
Not at all. So one of the things that I've got a couple of questions about how you thought about writing the book, and really, I suppose, the motivation behind some of the sections. You open up spending quite a bit of time, and not to say too much, but it occurred to me that you spent a reasonable amount of time, let's put it this way, making the case for what I would describe as why data at the beginning. And it seems so obvious to me as a business person, as an entrepreneur. So my question to you, I guess, is what behaviors do you see in the business world, or what drove you to feel compelled to give up what is, let's be honest, precious space, both on paper but also in your brain, to make the case for what some might think of as being obvious? Is data really still a hard sell for some CEOs?
Yeah, it is. I mean, there was a CEO about 6 months ago said to me, people talk about data, I don't get it. And that was part of be provocative, which is great. And I get that. But also, I think it's fair to say everyone has a different view of data. If you're in a regulator, Bank of England, you think of data as being one thing. If you're in marketing, you think of data as being another thing. If you're in privacy, you think of data. So everyone has their own view of data. And I guess in speaking to people, I realized that was definitely true. The other thing was that I guess one of the things that I wanted to make clear was that normally, and this is a bit of a tech history, people go to people in the business. So technologists historically have been subservient to people in the business and said, give us your requirements and we'll build something for you. Now, data is not like that. The problem is data is all about the business. And actually what you end up doing is being more proactive in explaining kind of the weaknesses you've seen. So whether it be, I've seen this in the data, I've seen that, you're telling people stuff that sometimes they know, but they don't always know. And you have to cross the line. So actually getting people to not give their requirements, because otherwise you would not be able to meet them halfway. You have to kind of cross the line and explain to them a lot more about the value of data and what it can do. When you do that, you get more power. But if you wait for them to ask for things, they won't know what to ask for. And so that was really the starting point, is to say, let's spend more time. And I think people trying to give their requirements is probably a little bit outdated now.
So following on from that, at the beginning of the early chapters, I couldn't tell you which one it is off the top of my head, but you talk about sort of an initial diagnostic. You've got your 10 questions that you use when you meet somebody for the first time in a business context. I hope it's not in a personal context, which you ask about, effectively their relationship with data. I'm just curious, as I was going through that list, I thought you must get some surprising answers from people where you're like, wow, you're a giant established brand or organization. I would have thought you'd have had that done. Do you still get surprised by what you see in companies?
Yeah, I mean, I can't mention any examples.
Of course.
I think that's probably not fair. But I think, I've seen firms that you look at and you think they're very polished, amazing. And then you see what they've got under the covers with their data, and it is quite shocking. So I think, processes that look good and everything else. And then you see the data underneath and you realize, A, they're not data driven. The quality of the data is not good. One organization I talked about in the book, quality of their data, in fact, probably a couple of different organizations, quality of their data varied from 35 to 45%, which means that if they were targeting customers the largest number of those customers did not get targeted because they didn't have the right data. And so those sort of things I find quite shocking. But when you talk through those things with people and they say, oh no, we're good at this, and then you dive down, you realize. So anyone who says they're good at anything, I no longer believe it. When people say I'm not very good at something, generally they're much better at it, which is a bit ironic. But when it comes to data, that's become true, I think.
I guess it goes to that notion of, the competency matrix, right? Are you unconsciously incompetent, consciously incompetent, unconsciously competent? So I suppose, it's probably paralleled in other fields where I suppose if you do have a sense of hubris about it, you're likely to put in that extra effort, as it were.
Definitely.
Having led a lot of large projects, a question for you: do you find that all journeys largely follow the same pattern, or are there recognizable differences, whether you'd call it maturity levels, or do you find that when you go to an organization, you go in there and you say, well, okay, you've gone from stage 1 to stage 2, I know where you're at? Or do you find that everyone's the same, or they're all completely different?
Yeah, I think everything's different. I think people start in different places. So across organizations, you see, different parts of an organization have different levels of maturity. I think that's true. You might see that, areas like, marketing, maybe digital marketing, all over data, it's their lifeblood. But then you'll go to HR and they go, oh no, we're a people-based business and it's all about the people. But actually, when you start asking them about, people's salaries and bonuses and things, they go straight to the data and they go, oh yeah, okay, so we get that. So I think projects start in different places. I think the challenge is that data is normally buried in a project. So when people come along, and so what I mean by that is I think that an organization might say, let's go and do a marketing campaign. Let's go and see if we can we're going to acquire some more customers. Let's look at compliance issues. They'll go and deal with those things, but they don't realize that in some cases, the biggest part of it, maybe 75, 80% of it is data. And so they start off by saying, let's do something. You get a business practitioner who's then leading a project, and then they turn around and delegate the activities to the data team afterwards. And the problem is, as a data team, when someone does that to you, they actually haven't got the right budget, they haven't got the right tools, and they haven't got the right capabilities lined up, and they've already agreed the project and it's already up and running. And so what that means is that you're then saying to your data team, well, we've already defined it, go fix it. And as a data professional, there can be nothing worse, because all you're doing, is saying to someone, I'm now telling you how to do your job, and it may not be the right way. There's an awful lot of that going on. And I think that's merely with the biggest number of business projects, people not really getting what data means to them.
I want to touch on your comment that you made about data quality, because that seems to be an almost persistent, evergreen topic. I remember one of my first projects that I worked on in the supermarket business, and they were trying to establish effectively master data management, not a single view of customer. They just wanted a single view of all their products, what they bought and sold to their customers. And that was a mammoth project I'm not even sure it ever finished. It seemed to be they were constantly chasing their tail with that. How much of the problem do you think in enterprise is data quality? And a follow-on question to that is, how much of that is born out of, I'm going to blame Adam Smith for this notion of the division of labor and business silos, where I own this chunk of the data and someone else owns another chunk, and trying to reconstitute whether it's a view of an employee or a view of a customer or a view of the finances requires you to start cutting across organizational lines and the fiefdoms and the power that goes with that. Thoughts?
Yeah, a big question, but I think the starting point, I think of data quality, it's not a homogenous problem. Okay, it starts. I call it data leakage, but I think is probably an easy way of describing it. So you start off at the beginning of a process, and you may have a salesperson talking to a customer, and they'll only talk about their products. And your organization may sell 3 or 4 products. They'll only talk about one, and they won't say, oh, have you got any other interests? Well, that's data leakage to me, because there's an opportunity, presumably, to do some upsell and some cross-sell. So you could sell more things to them. That's data leakage. You haven't caught that. They're only doing what they do. They may capture, or the customer may say, I'm not interested in what you're selling me, but what I really need is this. They don't capture it. That's data leakage. Someone else could have used that data downstream. So the challenge is always that salespeople who start that sales process, for example, will be I guess they're kind of motivated to sell. And if there's nothing there, they won't capture the data that enables someone else to do something. And so really they don't see the value downstream. People want them to sell more. They focus on doing it. And so it's very short-termist. So that's really the start of the data journey. And if that data if they don't collect the right customer details, we're talking about, company hierarchy, where are they based, all those sort of things, you miss out on that downstream. And so that happens more and more. And the more you process data, the more people do something with it. The more someone says at the end of the process, there may be a compliance process, and everyone's going, we don't know, why did they say they wanted this? And you didn't capture the reason why. And so suddenly you have a problem later on where someone has to go back to the customer. So more interventions, picking up on data that's been missed out. The quality isn't good enough. Maybe putting the data in free format. So I think it's data quality problems, and that leakage is caused by real world problems and by people's focus on being incentivized to do certain things. So there is a data literacy problem of helping people understand that actually as part of your job, you're going to help the organization grow more, because if you do this, we can sell more downstream. So they may not always consider that, and they are working on their products because that's what they're incentivized to do. So I think it's not about data. That is all about business incentivization and business process. And people being able to say, I am going to do the right thing for the organization, not just for myself. As you go further and further downstream with the data, people are adding more layers to it, joining it up, definitions and everything else. There are so many quality issues, but in itself, that's caused by people not really understanding that they have a responsibility, not only to help the business in terms of, profitability and everything else, but also a big part of that is in getting the right data, because that will itself drive profitability and operational. Probably the biggest one is about operational efficiency. So any data problem you do not fix up front takes 10 times as much effort downstream, and that's a bigger cost to an organization.
Humongous, not just in terms of cost of getting the problem solved, but of course in terms of clock time, because if you've got to spend weeks or months trying to cleanse the data to get the report out to tell you what you did last quarter, well, you've already missed a quarter, haven't you, before you're able to respond to that and change. So there's a latency issue that I think is quite corrosive. So following on from that question about the role of the CEO and the CDO, because I'm imagining as a chief data officer, having an awkward conversation with the board or your peers, and they'll say, well, data quality is a problem. And they turn to you and go, well, why haven't you fixed it? You've got CDO in your title. Talk to me about the relationship with the CEO and how important is it that they, or maybe what are some exemplary behaviors of CEOs who've helped make that problem more manageable, and maybe talk about the anti-pattern that maybe even exacerbates the problem if it's not dealt with by the CEO appropriately.
Yeah, I think the challenge with CEOs and a lot of exec is understanding of data. So my experience is the best CEO would ask to be coached and ask for an explanation on what should be done, because they can then encourage it. So to turn it around into being, it's your problem, go fix it, it will never be fixed that way. I mean, I've done enough data programs where I could go through and identify, 120 fixes for data quality, but actually not one single one of them involves me. So I can help, I can explain. So you can go away and say we can get a better source of data. We can go to stuff after the event, and that's fine. But you still need someone who is the owner of that data, and I think that's the key to agree whether the data should be fixed. So if you go and fix things in the background, you need approval from someone to say, you've got this customer name wrong. Are you happy that this is the right answer? And then they have to approve it. So I guess what I'm saying is that if you put in place proper data ownership, and I think there's a simple way of doing it, and it's not difficult to imagine. First of all, a CEO and the exec have to understand that there's a right way of doing things. Then for HR, they would own all people-related data, finance own finance-related data, marketing own, potentially the customer with sales, and, there's a bit of kind of overlap there. But people own those data sets. And then the people who look after certain systems are the data stewards, and they will go fix it. And all you're doing as a CDO is helping them understand how to make it better and giving them the tools and techniques to do it. But ultimately, they have to go fix it.
Leading on from that, I guess, talking then about organizations that are then have recognized they need to transform it, they need to go do it, they need to fix it. The obvious question is where to start. In your book, you talk about 5 waves, or you describe 5 different waves. I guess I've got a couple of questions. Number one is that the place I start, is trying to figure out which of the waves is appropriate to me? Where do I get going? How do I self-identify?
Yeah, I think if you're starting with a blank sheet of paper, you aspire to do stuff. And that's what I think is the first stage. And many people use maturity models. And for me, it's a simple process of saying, if you want to do stuff, but you don't know how to do it, you aspire to do it. So you're starting with a blank sheet of paper. That gives you opportunity, but it means you've got nothing you can rely on. Then I think, that bit about maturing is, okay, I've got something up and running. How do I get it so that it's working better? And I think all the time, you can't do it as one. You can't go straight to, we're going to do something amazing and we're differentiating from all our competitors. It's too big a stretch. And I think that's why we're saying, take people on a journey to have some context for how they're doing. I think sometimes it's very easy to say, you're doing lots of data projects, lots of data activities, but knowing where you are is a useful checkpoint. How am I doing? And how far do I want to go? And I think that's key. So when you start doing more and more, if you're not careful, if you're building data assets, data products, you suddenly find the demand is so great. If you've not automated them, you can't keep up with demand. So what happens very quickly is loads of people say, oh, this is great. Can I have one? Can I have one? Can I have one? If you don't automate, then you're continually upgrading, looking after those assets. So unless you start automating, you cannot scale. And so automating and scaling is key. That's when you start industrializing stuff and you start saying, yeah, okay, we can now do more and more of this and it works. And big data platforms and everything else give you the ability to do things at scale. Once you start doing all of that, then suddenly data drives value. Start realizing that value. And in small pockets, you can do it beforehand. But when you're starting to see that, you can really feel the difference. You know that you're generating more customers. You're stopping customers from leaving you. You're dealing with your compliance issues. People are happy. You're starting to analyze everything and you're data driven. And then you'll find a few things to differentiate. And I think knowing that you can do more is quite good. If you're a practitioner, what else can I do to do stuff better? But I think with all those data capabilities, of which there are many, you'll never be at the same place with all of them because you'll invest at different rates. So it's about context. It's about trying to encourage people to do more and get better.
One of the later waves you talk about or introduce, I think it might be in automation or industrialization, is AI, unsurprisingly. Although maybe I should say surprisingly, 2022, you would have been writing it, in 2021, and AI didn't feel like the big thing that it is today. So congratulations on calling that ball. And you set aside a decent chunk of the book to it. Although I noticed in the opening couple of paragraphs, I very much got the sense you were trying to reset expectations. What's your take on AI in the enterprise? And you quote the Gartner hype cycle, sort of the peak of expectations. And I maybe tie it back to this data quality issue.
Worth saying that although I was talking about AI, AI has been around since forever. I started using AI in 1987 at Citi doing mortgage underwriting and credit risk. So I think for me it's not new. So when people talk about AI, I'm going, yeah, okay, let's not forget that there's a lot of learning and knowledge around already. So don't just think it's something new and then create loads of risk without thinking about it. So I think that's my starting point, and I'm now rewriting the book with more AI content in, which I think is almost inevitable. So that version's coming out in August as a bit of a sales thing. But coming back to the question, I think, so the kind of AI issues start off with probably, I don't know, a bunch of things. So first of all, people talk about how should you use AI and what can it be used for? And everyone's saying, every board is saying, we need to have AI. Unless you're using AI, it's a problem. And I think that's really the biggest driver. And it's a lot of marketing budgets from firms, a lot of investment from firms in AI capabilities, and a lot of pressure. And I think now we're seeing people saying, we've got to get the value, we need to know where to get that value and how to do it. All I'm saying is I think the process is the same with data. AI and data science are an extension of each other, right? So many things you can do with AI have exactly the same tools like Python, and you can do exactly the same things you can do with data science, but they're an extension of it. They're a bit more sophisticated and everything else, and that's fine. But it's the same people with the same skill set to drive innovation. So it's not really that new, but the tools are exciting and you can do a lot with it. So I think there's a lot of expectation on it. I think it's with that much expectation, it feels a bit disappointing when people don't quite get that value quickly. But some organizations are getting a lot of value, and that's great. But then that sets the expectation that everyone should. So I think the competitive element is not helpful. So the reality is every organization can get some value from AI, and embedding it in the organization, knowing how to do it is kind of key. So I always kind of think, you should have an AI strategy, which is maybe 3 or 4 pages. This is what we're going to do. Have an owner for it. Otherwise, everyone's having a go. Figure out how it comes together. And then when you start doing that, then suddenly you start to drive the business use cases for it. I always think, with data and AI, you've got 2 starting places. It's either a top-down approach. So you've got a business problem. Can AI help me with that? Or I've got AI, what can I do with it? And that's also okay. Other people have used AI to do certain things. What can I do? And I think those are valid. I think the last place you should start, and this is what worries me, I see people starting with projects, and projects are random. So you use projects to deliver things, but you never ever start with a project, because if you start with a project, someone says we should do this, then the first question you're going to ask is, well, why should we do this project? And it's one of several things you could do. So I always say, never start with a project. Always start with what's the business problem we've got, and therefore what are the options? And one of the options for AI could be, actually, there's a traditional way of doing it. We don't need AI. So people are using AI when they don't need to today. But also you get more use. So AI then becomes an extension of things you can't do today as well. And it's great. Many things you can do that you couldn't before. And I think the biggest change right now is that people are starting to use it to augment people's capabilities. So by that I mean, you've got a decision to make, an underwriting decision, insurance or whatever it is, and you're looking and saying, would AI give me a different view on this? Is there anything else it would add to what I already know? That becomes quite powerful. When people go straight to, I am using AI to automate something, my view will be a data quality issue. It's kind of impossible unless you've got all the data lined up, because in order to make decisions, the quality and governance underneath needs to be good. And then the final one, which worries me, is automated decision-making using AI. And I think that's the bit where, you end up with a black box solution using AI, doing something that no one's really validated. You need someone who, a new role of explainer. Someone writes something and you go, let's explain it. And the unintended consequences you get from doing that, which inevitably are not well thought through. So I think, that really is, I think all of them are worthy, but the starting point, people need to get the experience, build it up by augmentation of, people's knowledge and roles. Knowledge roles with AI is fantastic.
Yeah, I think I'll echo your sentiment. Just, it's an old adage, but garbage in, garbage out. And if 2 highly functioning executives can't agree on what the data is trying to tell them because they've got a different view of it, then giving that to a computer is all it's going to do is automate chaos effectively. So I feel as though the data quality, the veracity conversation needs to be tackled, and you could defer it, but I suspect it's only going to exacerbate whatever problems you're currently suffering from.
And you can use AI to clean up your data quality, but it won't actually, some of it can be fixed automatically. It's almost a no regrets thing. You can use it to say, how should I fix this? And if you found someone's email address without the dot in the .com, go fix. Thank you very much. Very happy with that. So you can drive those sort of changes and everything else. There's a lot you can do. And you can also get it to recommend things that should be changed. And so, actually, I think, if you're using it properly, you'd use it to eat your own breakfast, and that's great.
I was just going to say, but I'm going back to your example of WorldCom, which you use in the book. If you've been systematically miscategorizing assets, the AI will pick up on that pattern and keep doing it for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that comes back to the data it's learning on. People are using lots of synthetic data, which they've manufactured and may not be real world data. We all imply bias in what we generate and everything else. So I think that really becomes part of the issue for large language models is really what data you use and who owns the data and all the copyright around that data and everything else. So I think there's lots of issues to be resolved. I don't think it's an either or. It's either great or it's rubbish. I think it just needs, there's a lot of AI work needs to be done to make it real and make it work for us, because it can do a lot. But I don't think jumping straight to it'll do everything for us is an answer.
We've got a few more minutes left, and I've got a couple more questions if I could ask for your indulgence. The first one is, as you wrap up the book, a couple of topics appeared. The first one caught my attention. That's Centre of Excellences, or COEs as they're known. It immediately reminded me of a conversation I had at a telco who was in the process of, back in the day, this is 10 years ago, looking at adopting big data, back when that was the buzzword. And he somewhat sarcastically remarked, he said, yes, we've got a COE, we're working on a big data COE at the moment. He said, there are only two problems with it. One is it's not centralized, and the second is it's not particularly excellent, which I thought was hilarious. But one of the things that I've observed with COEs is similar to the issue of having a chief data officer is it almost encourages folks to say, or a chief innovation officer, another thing I've seen, oh, that's not my problem, that's the COE's problem. Is there a danger that happens when you establish a COE?
Yeah, I think it's about how you do it. For me, a centre of excellence is not the owner of every problem, but they are the facilitators of everything. And there's a big difference. And I think, if you think about finance teams, product teams, they should be, in my view, when you've matured enough, they should be across an organization. So people who are doing insight should sit in the right business units doing the work. They shouldn't be in a centralized team. You cannot deliver the best outcomes when it's all centralized. But what you need to do is to figure out, how do we join everything up across the organization? And you can only do that when you've got a center of excellence who then start enabling people to say, well, we've got some new AI tools. This is how we'd encourage you to use them. These are the risks, and share that with everybody. Otherwise, those problems of everybody in the organization starting to use ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot, everyone doing their own individual thing, and then they all make the same mistakes over and over again. If you don't have a center of excellence, they won't learn from it. So what you need is for someone to say, we've got the experience, we can guide you and help you. We can set the guardrails for how to do things, how to manage things, but we will encourage and support you. And I think really that's the change in a center of excellence. You still have areas you can go to talk about things, but they don't necessarily do everything.
Yeah, and I think the critical message, if I'm listening to you correctly, is that is not an excuse for you not to become data literate, not to learn the tools. It's an opportunity for you to leverage the experience of your organization in a more consistent way. And I think that's the critical one. Is it's not a get out of jail free card. You can't skip the learning. You finish up on leadership, and it's probably the one chapter in the book where I felt you'd set us up with a cliffhanger before the next book. Is that an area where you felt you wanted to self-edit and just go, you know what, I've said all I want to say about data, but let's not forget leadership. I love the comparison between Henry Ford and Alfred Sloan. Can we expect to see a book on leadership from you?
So possibly not. The next book is an update, but it will have more on leadership. And I guess it's a great question. I think leadership, the reason it's a bit of a cliffhanger, I think, is that it's been evolving. Okay, so in the past 2 or 3 years, the number of CDOs has grown substantially. I think, when I was writing this in 21, CIOs pretty much owned data with a data leader reporting into them. And what the name of the data leader was, it could have been data leader or chief data officer or whatever. I think now we're seeing a move where they are split. CIO's role is probably about running the estate and the systems and the platforms and engineering. Data is moving more and more. It's a different type, it's a different beast. And so the leadership is really very different. It's much more embedded in the business, much more part of everyday operational stuff and less submissive. And I think that change for me is where leadership is going. And I touched on that earlier. I think rather than getting requirements from people, which technology generally does, it is driving the business to say, well, we've seen this in your data. This is what we're doing. And actually, let's change things. So it is very much a catalyst for innovation. I don't know whether that role's settled down. I think there are many CDOs who cannot do that yet because they're relatively new to role. But I see that as where it's going is, a CDO becoming very much a right-hand person for the COO and starting to understand all elements of the organization and being able to spot the weaknesses, the opportunities, and expose them, and being able to then, through the COO's role, be able to drive them forward. I haven't yet made my mind up where that's going, but I do think it's becoming, a catalyst for organization change and innovation.
All right. Well, with that, I'm going to give you I've got to tee up my last question for you. The new year's just rolled around. We're recording in January, so I'm going to take this as an opportunity to ask a predictions question. Technology doesn't appear to be slowing down. We've just had the announcement from NVIDIA, I think at CES, about their wonderful new AI appliance. There seems to be more data everywhere by the minute. What are your predictions for data in 2025?
I think the starting point is organizations will start to move to being data-driven. And what that means, that's the maturity bit. Organizations have realized in putting AI in that they need data. And I think more than anything else, that is the turning point from data having to sell, and you touched on that earlier, Paul, people in data having to sell the concept of data, what it can do. It is now being pulled. As soon as people start using AI, they're saying, we need that data, and then it's exposing the problems and everything else. So I think AI is driving data in a way it wasn't driven before, and I think that's great news. I don't think it's a problem. I think it's an opportunity that everyone needs to grasp. And I think, therefore, faster decisions, better decisions, understanding that, no holds barred, you can get on and do anything, but actually, investing properly in it is the right thing to do, and treating it as being an asset for the organization. I think that's where we're going to, which is a level of maturation which we haven't had before.
I love it. Well, Simon, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. Thank you for being so generous with your time. If people want to get hold of you, where can they go?
DataTick.co.uk, find us there. Or LinkedIn, come and find me on LinkedIn. Happy to chat with anyone. So please reach out.
Excellent. Well, and I also want to thank you all for listening in and watching, for those of you watching on the YouTubes. Thank you, of course, to Cloudera for bringing us another episode of the AI Forecast. If you want to reach out to myself or Cloudera on social media, hit us up at Cloudera on LinkedIn. So if you've got any questions or feedback for ourselves or for guests you'd like to see on future episodes, do let us know. We'll see you all next week.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Cloudera.